It is my great pleasure to join this APEC 2021 CEO Summit. I thank the Government of New Zealand, the Maori people as the traditional owners of the land, and all the participants for the opportunity to address you today on one of the major imperatives of our world, sustainability. You, as business leaders, have a crucial role to play. These are times of emergency. After 18 months, we are still struggling with a global pandemic that has exposed and exacerbated inequalities, discrimination, and numerous human rights gaps. In addition, the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss created by human action and inaction is directly and severely threatening human rights, the future of our economies, and our very survival. Those who have least contributed to the climate crisis are often the most affected, including millions of people across the Pacific region. And as in the case of COVID-19, the greatest impacts are felt by the most vulnerable and marginalized people and groups. This includes indigenous peoples, the ancestral guardians of the land that are now also facing the consequences of humanity's unsustainable consumption and production at the global level. No doubt, we are living in times of emergency, but we're also witnessing a global rise of consciousness. Across the world, people are already taking to the streets and using strategic litigation to demand climate justice. And I can tell you these movements will only grow. A tangible result of this mobilization is the growing recognition of the inherent links between human rights and the environment. Nowhere is this more visible than in last month's historical resolution, in which for the first time the Human Rights Council recognized that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. Another example are the climate laws recently introduced in Fiji, New Zealand, and the Republic of Korea. I call on all APEC members to develop ambitious national determined contributions and introduce their own national legislation to enable stronger climate action. Adaptation and mitigation measures must be centered in human rights, ensuring meaningful inclusion and participation of all stakeholders. The private sector has a central role. To avert future climate harms and ensure climate justice, business enterprises must be part of the solution. I will tell you why. Much of the CO emissions causing climate change come from business-driven economic activity. To respect human rights, businesses can and should support initiatives to prevent, mitigate, and adapt to climate change, including through innovation. This year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which reflect existing global consensus on the distinct but interrelated human rights responsibilities of governments and businesses. Under the Guiding Principles, businesses must respect human rights, including the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. For meaningful climate action to take place, the private sector, including financing corporations, needs to put in place human rights due diligence mechanisms. These are meant to ensure that people's rights are not negatively impacted, to limit negative environmental and climate change impacts, and contribute positively to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. My office is ready to support countries in the development of their own national action plans. In the Pacific, we have been organizing discussions, trainings, and capacity building workshops on the UN Guiding Principles for the last 3 months. I encourage you all to participate in the upcoming Second Business and Human Rights Pacific Regional Forum, which will take place later this month. The Guiding Principles also reminds us that states have a duty to protect human rights against the negative impact of business activities. As a former head of state, I know that if companies are to respect human rights, governments must ensure that the correct institutional and economic incentives are in place and provide necessary guidance. In that regard, I welcome New Zealand's recent adoption of a law requiring financial firms to report and act on climate-related risk. Dear colleagues, recovering better from COVID-19 is our duty. We need to increase investment in social protection and universal health coverage. We need a new social contract and an economic model that puts human rights and human beings at the center of economic policy, accelerating our path towards realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Recovering better is also an opportunity to address the climate crisis by building new systems that are cleaner, fairer, and more resilient. As governments and businesses adopt measures to revive their activities, economies, and societies, they have a shared responsibility to protect human rights, address inequalities, and make a transformational shift to a more just and green human rights-based economy. And we need to act now. And we need your full support and leadership. Thank you so much.